I'm a fan of Dandan. This unique micro-format centers around control magic, top deck manipulation of a shared library, and text-changing effects as a means of removing its titular fish. If you haven't played it, I strongly recommend that you do. And while I could spend the duration of this video talking about it, I'd instead recommend that you watch either of Ristic Studies or the Trinket Mage's excellent videos which go over the format, and I've linked below. I've been toying around with my own version of a shared deck format for a little while, and when Axia Now announced this year's Command Fest Birmingham, I had a deadline for at least a first version to test with actual people. This did admittedly lead to some mild panic, a lot of hand-wringing over card choices and quantities, and a lot of praying that my card market orders arrived on time. But we got there. When I first started thinking about what I wanted to achieve with my own version, there were a couple priorities that I identified. First, I wanted to incorporate some of the gameplay elements that make Dandan so much fun, but still create something that is distinct through the incorporation of some mechanics that would be unique to my format. Next, I wanted to use cards that there was at least a good chance of finding in bulk boxes. Maybe not quite a pauper level restriction, but relatively affordable and not impossible to find. And likely most importantly, I wanted it to be fun, and I'm hoping I might just have achieved those goals. This video is going to go over my full thought process for the cards that went into this list and how they factor into gameplay, with a sort of TLDR summary of the rules and deck list towards the end, which I'll include a timestamp for in the chapters and description, and whether you decide to jump straight to that or stick around for the sweet analysis, please consider liking and subscribing because I like when the numbers go up. So let's answer the question. What is minor offense? So my starting point for this format was a card that's been a bit of a white whale for me in my time playing Magic. And part of the reason for this is that it isn't legal in any format, for two reasons. The first is that it originates from 2017's Unstable, and as such is silver bordered, and the second is that it completely warps the way that Magic is played. The Grand Calcutron is a legendary artifact for Azorius that, when it enters, turns each player's hand into a program. That is, an ordered row of revealed cards. Players can only play the first card of their program. If they would draw a card, they instead reveal it and place it anywhere in their program, and at the beginning of each player's end step, if their program contains less than 5 cards, they draw cards equal to the difference. And while this card may be played as your commander in games allowing silver-bordered cards, just in case your Rule 0 table wanted to nitpick, it can be an absolute nightmare for any deck not designed to play around it, easily leading to players being locked out of taking game actions for multiple turns if they haven't sequenced their program well, their draw doesn't curve out, or their fixing is lacking in higher color counts. This can almost turn the card into a form of stacks effect in certain circumstances, and based on the reduced viewership for my video talking about that whole archetype, I'm guessing that would be pretty unpopular. Maybe this is an idea I'll revisit in the future when I feel like making a Rule 0 deck for those pods that are game for it, but really I wanted to use this as the condition or defining aspect of my micro format. Depending on whether you want to be a total stickler for the rules or not, either you can have it begin in play under the control of either player, but really it doesn't especially matter, and otherwise it could be considered an emblem for all intents and purposes. There are no ways of interacting with it in the deck, and it doesn't confer any advantage to either player. The point is that from the beginning and for the duration of the game, both players are subject to these effects. So with this, we have a framework for how the game should be played, as well as a few considerations for what the cards we include should do. The first is that we want to keep mana costs as low as possible, as while how their hand curves out should be a consideration made by players when sequencing their program, we want to minimize the number of cards that could potentially brick a player's hand. As an extension of this, we want to keep the number of colors in our mana pool relatively low, and/or offer adequate fixing in our mana base so players aren't prevented casting spells in other colors. Finally, given that hands are public knowledge and the position of cards within a player's program is important, we're going to be building this format around hand attack. And that is something that I feel gives this format its own distinct flavor. Well, in addition to the fact that hands are revealed and you have to play your hand in order, but we also need a creature to be the face of our format, and I had just the thing in mind. Forsaken Miner is a 2/2 skeleton rogue for 1 black that cannot block, and has the ability that whenever you commit a crime, you can pay 1 black to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. For those not in the know, to commit a crime is to target an opponent, anything they control, and/or cards in their graveyard. And between all the cards in this list, we are going to be doing a hell of a lot of that. Miner fits our brief by only costing 1, and if we have a source of black in our opening hand, whether it enters tapped or untapped, we can position Miner second in our program and either play it on our first turn with an untapped land, or as our first action on turn 2 after a tap land on turn 1. This prevents our hand from clogging up straight away and allows it to fit in nicely with larger turns when we get more mana on board. For this format, I decided to carry across the 80 card deck size from Dandan, as well as the rough count of creatures in that list with 10 copies of Forsaken Miner. To mirror the 5 hits to kill present in Dandan, I did feel that the numbers needed tweaking slightly, and so to keep things pacey, health totals are reduced to 10. The speed of the format is definitely helped by the absence of blocking, but between the focus on forced discard and presence of removal, I felt that there were enough ways to deal with miners without it. It definitely helps make every miner that actually makes it to the board feel like a threat, but we'll get into our options for dealing with them later. So just what does the hand attack in this format look like? Well, with the full knowledge of our opponent's hand that the Calcutron provides, it's almost like we have 2 battlefields to worry about. To allow for this, the second most common card in the deck with a total of 8 copies is Harsh Scrutiny from Kaladesh. For 1 black, target opponent reveals their hand, then we choose a creature card from it which that player discards, and scry 1. Now, this works nicely within the format, as it is also cheap, allows us to force our opponents to discard copies of Miner, commits a crime which allows us to recur miners from the graveyard, and due to targeting the player doesn't get stuck at the start of the program, even if we can clearly see that there are no copies of Miner in our opponent's hand. The Scry 1 offers top deck manipulation ideally as a bonus, but it helps that this never makes Scrutiny a totally dead card. Seasoned Dandan players know the benefit of Scry when sharing a deck, as it allows us to control our opponent's draw, but also additionally lets us shape our own if we know we're going to go below the 5 cards in our program threshold by the time we hit our end step. To hit non-land cards other than Miner, we're running 2 copies of Duress, which has target opponent reveal their hand, from which we choose a non-creature, non-land card that they then discard for 1 black. This allows us to disrupt our opponent's sequencing, as well as getting them to drop their hand attacks or removal if we already have a miner on the field. In addition to this, there's 2 copies of Blackmail, which has target player reveal 3 cards from their hand, from which we choose 1 to be discarded. This has the potential to hit any card in the deck, depending on what your opponent chooses, but with the added utility that you can target yourself to put a card from elsewhere in your program in the graveyard. This can help prevent your hand from bricking, allow you to dump a miner from late in your program so it's actually accessible for recursion with its trigger, or bin one of several cards in the deck that have flashback. For another version of this effect at instant speed, we've got our first non-black card in Venerian Glimmer, which for blue and X has target player reveal their hand, then discard a non-land card of our choice with mana value X or less. This has the same benefits of Blackmail, but being an instant may allow you to get a miner in the yard prior to a crime-committing spell's resolution if you sequence your program correctly. In most cases, this is going to cost 2 mana total, as the majority of the deck is made up of 1-drops, but it can help us hit some of the more impactful 2 mana cards that our opponent is unlikely to offer up to a Blackmail with an extra mana commitment. Instant speed interaction can definitely still be relevant, but the level of pre-planning required in both keeping mana open and having the instant in position at the start of your program, as well as this being obvious to your opponent, makes it less of a factor in how the format plays. For the last of our discard pieces, we've got 2 cards that can be absolute haymakers. Cabal Therapy is a sorcery that costs 1 black and is the most expensive card in our list by dollar value. We name a non-land card, then target player reveals their hand and discards all cards with that name. Given we have full knowledge of both our and our opponent's hands, this can be used to clear out all copies of the same card from either player's hand at once, and can allow us to set up for big turns where multiple miners trigger from the graveyard simultaneously, given you've got the mana to pay for them. It also has flashback, sacrifice a creature, so we can reuse this from the grave if we've got a miner on board. Additionally, due to a spell not being finished being cast, and therefore a crime not being committed until its costs have been paid, you can sacrifice Forsaken Miner to pay the cost, putting it in the graveyard where it will trigger when the crime of targeting your opponent is committed. This also allows you to pay the cost and put it straight back onto the battlefield if you have the mana available. That made sense, right? One last form of hand attack comes in the shape of 2 copies of Collective Brutality, a sorcery for black and 1 with Escalate, which allows us to choose an additional mode for each time we pay the cost of discarding a card. The 3 modes are: target opponent reveals their hand, you choose an instant or sorcery card from it, that player discards that card, target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. This allows us to get rid of a spell in our opponent's hand, remove a miner on board, and swing life totals by 4, all while sculpting our program by paying its Escalate cost. For this reason, it's likely the strongest card in the format, and is an absolute lifeline if you find yourself behind. Do not underestimate this card. If it's in your opponent's program, it should be priority 1 for discarding, and if it's in yours, make sure it's accessible. Don't do what I did during a game and stick both copies of it at the end of your program, never to be played, then lose. At least I'm staying true to the country of my birth by being very bad at a game I made up. We've also got Defeat, which destroys a creature with power 2 or less at sorcery speed for 1 and a black, and Eliminate, which destroys a creature with mana cost 3 or less at instant speed for the same cost. Destroys. This spot was initially held by Murder, costed at 1 black pip more, but due to the additional considerations I already identified about the somewhat complex nature of instant speed interaction in this format, it didn't feel like it justified the extra cost in playtesting. I felt the option should still exist and not all removal be limited to sorcery speed, but I think if you've effectively set up your hand and left mana open just so you can destroy a miner on your opponent's turn, you've likely earned it. Prior to testing, I was worried that less overall instant speed interaction would make the format less fun or otherwise feel slow, but from the games that I played, the way that discard works with the Calcutron and the presence of instant speed recursion made it still feel very interactive, and due to having to play cards in a predetermined order, turns and rounds felt pacey and fun. It turns out playtesting can actually prove your initial ideas wrong and help you identify solutions. I mean, fucking who'd have thought, right? And speaking of instant speed recursion, our last source of removal is likely our most interesting. The deck contains 4 copies of Bone Splinters, a sorcery for 1 black that destroys a target creature with the additional cost of sacrificing a creature. With this working the same way as the flashback cost for Cabal Therapy, it effectively costs the same as Defeat and Eliminate to not go down a creature. But it's a very cool interaction that I wanted to include wherever possible, and having the option of trading a creature for a lesser cost definitely has situational benefits at different parts of the game. The requirement of having a creature on both sides of the board to cast it does mean you have to be considered in where you place it in your program, however, as it can be a hard stop to your game actions if the conditions for casting it aren't met. As much as I wanted to reduce the chances of bricking, I did want to include some cards that required you to think carefully about how you set up your hand. So you have been warned. Our most mana-intensive form of removal is another blue spell in Uncharted Voyage, an instant for blue and 3 that has target creature's owner put it on the top or bottom of their library, then we surveil 1. Now this spell comes at a premium, but it is the only source of removal that doesn't also make the miner available to our opponent to recur by putting it in the graveyard. The added benefit of getting to manipulate the top card of the deck definitely increases its utility. I will say that this was a fringe piece in the games I played, and one I'll be keeping an eye on as I test more. This is probably due to it being the highest costed spell in the deck, as well as not being in black, which likely leads to it being placed further towards the end of programs, in opening hands and throughout. But I do like what it contributes mechanically to the format, and so have stuck with it for now. Let's have a look at the last 3 spells in our list, which fall outside of the categories of hand attack and removal, but offer their own forms of utility. For 1 blue, Otherworldly Gaze has you Surveil 3, and has flashback for blue and 1. This allows for a little extra draw sculpting for you, your opponent, or both, and a chance to make minors and flashbacks available by throwing them in the yard. Having this as an option for either player to flashback as well once it's in the yard definitely helps reduce the chance of totally dead turns, which we like. Now we're going to get a little more niche with our last 2 cards originating from all the way back in Odyssey. Recoup is a sorcery for red and 1 generic that gives target sorcery in your graveyard flashback for its mana cost until end of turn, and has flashback for red and 3 generic. If you have the mana, this gives you access to the lion's share of cards in the pool that may have been cast or discarded previously, and can help get back the 2 big hitters in Cabal Therapy and Collective Brutality. Notably, our graveyard is our opponent's graveyard, and so in this format, Recoup also commits a crime. And guess what that means? Thanks to this little quirk, Otherworldly Gaze is literally the only spell other than Minor itself that doesn't commit a crime, and this definitely helps keep the game going. And in a format like this, it would be a shame to go without at least a little graveyard hate. Lastly, we have Coffin Purge, an instant for 1 black that has us exile target card from a graveyard with flashback for 1 black. This is likely the exception to what I said about instant speed interaction being less relevant, as it can be used both from your program and graveyard to exile a minor from the graveyard in response to your opponent committing a crime, before they can pay the cost to put it back on the battlefield. In addition, due to the relatively large share of cards in the pool with flashback, this being able to take those cards out of the game is definitely a plus. There's currently just 2 copies of this card in the list, which feels reasonable given how skewed the power of Exile is in a shared deck format with a focus on recursion, and the fact that it has flashback means that it can be cast up to 4 times in a single game. With a cast from hand and then its flashback exiling both itself and whatever it targets, 2 copies can take 6 cards effectively out of the game entirely. That seems pretty impactful. So finally, let's have a look at lands. In line with the core Dandan list, we're running 34 in total. 16 of these are basic swamps, which is representative of the majority of our mana pips. Then the other 18 slots are occupied by 6 different non-basics. For further top deck manipulation, we're running 2 of each of the temples in Grixis, these being Temple of Deceit, Temple of Epiphany, and Temple of Malice. These help us get some fixing for our non-black spells, as well as allowing us to stack our and our opponent's draws, which is consistently relevant throughout the game. The rest of our mana base is made up by the 2-color deserts from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, which I refer to affectionately as crime lands. These all enter tapped and deal 1 damage to target opponent when they enter, triggering any minors in the yard. Now, I went back and forth for a long time on including these, as they upset the pattern that otherwise exists in the format of dealing 2 damage at a time. The neatness of Dandan's 5 hits and you're out definitely makes up a bit of its charm, but I decided that providing another source of crimes to keep recursion readily available was worth the slight lumpiness. The best way to think about it is this: the temples are essentially free spells, if not very good ones, in a format where you share a library, and so provide a utility beyond their fixing. Dealing damage and triggering Forsaken Minor feels like it fits in line with this philosophy. I will admit that I did briefly consider including the Surveil lands instead, but I don't know if you've seen the price of those lately. The budgetary consideration of the format kinda goes out the window when a single copy of Undercity Sewers will set you back more than the entirety of the current 80 card list. So, never mind. That's not to say that they wouldn't make good substitutions for the temples or in addition to the lands in this list. So, if you fancy a little proxying in your version, Be my guest. We're running 6 copies of Soured Springs, 4 copies of Jagged Barrens, and 2 of Eroded Canyons to maintain a skew towards sources of black mana, but also make sure that the other colours needed are readily available, and that with reasonable mulligans and a good sequence, players' hands shouldn't be bricking often. If you watch to this point, thank you, and you can ignore the next message. But here comes the TLDR rule and card summary. What's up, filthy video skippers? The fourth wall has been broken. I am unbound! The rules for Minor Offence are as follows. Players share a graveyard and library, and each begin with 10 life. The goal is to reduce the opponent to 0 life, and normal rules on deck outs apply. Players draw 7 and may mulligan, again drawing 7 and putting 1 card on the bottom for each time they've drawn a new hand, so normal non-commander mulligan rules. Then after mulligans have been resolved, players sequence their hands before revealing them. This helps prevent counterplay before the game even starts. The Grand Calcutron begins in play under the first player's control, or otherwise exists as an emblem that reads, when the Grand Calcutron enters, each player's hand becomes a program, an ordered row of revealed cards. Players can only play the first card of their program. If a card would be put into a player's hand from anywhere, that player reveals it and places it anywhere within their program instead. And at the beginning of each player's end step, if that player's program has fewer than 5 cards, they draw cards equal to the difference. You don't really need a copy of the actual card as long as you have a reference for its rules text. The full deck consists of 10 copies of Forsaken Miner, 2 copies of Coffin Purge, 2 of Eliminate, 4 Otherworldly Gaze, 2 Uncharted Voyage, 2 Venerean Glimmer, 2 Blackmail, 4 Bone Splinters, 2 Cabal Therapy, 2 Collective Brutality, 2 Defeat, 2 Duress, 8 copies of Harsh Scrutiny, and 2 copies of Recoup. The mana base consists of 16 Swamps, 2 of each of the temples in Grixis, Deceit, Epiphany, and Malice, 2 copies of Eroded Canyon, 4 of Jagged Barrens, and 6 of Soured Springs. As previously mentioned, a big consideration of this format was that I wanted it to be affordable to put together. And as of the recording of this video, it will set you back a combined $37.91 from Card Kingdom, or €18.60 from Card Market for the cheapest printings, including a copy of the Grand Calcutron itself. And if this video really pops off and I inadvertently manipulate the secondary market, I do apologize. I, of course, want you guys to take this list, try it out, and make changes as you see fit, much like people have with Dandan, and I'll be sure to be bringing it with me to Magic Nights and cons to play it with as many people as possible. So if you see me in the wild, be sure to ask. I will definitely have it with me. One fun quirk of this format is that given there's no hidden information, you can effectively goldfish any changes to the deck you make by yourself. I will no doubt be iterating on this list as I go, but I think this is a great starting point, and if you do try it out or make any changes, I would love to hear what you think and what they are in the comments. The full list can be found linked below, with the rules and text for the Grand Calcutron, as well as summaries for the role of each card in the deck, written out in the primer. I'll leave a link for the original version, then create a separate Moxfield list for future edits, which I'll also include a link for if you want to keep up with it. I had so much fun testing this out at Command Fest, and I have to say a massive thank you to Tom, Tristan, Eve, and Spencer for being the best guinea pigs I could ask for, and you can find their socials below. Also, thank you to the team at Axion for putting together another great UK event. It is so appreciated. If you like what I do and want to support me, the best ways are joining the channel with memberships starting from as little as 99p or cents or whatever your currency may be, or contributing to my coffee, which is linked below. Also, consider joining my Discord if you'd like to chat with me and other like-minded players, or to hop on Spell Table and get some games in. I'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks as always for watching, and if you give me a +1+1 and like and subscribe, you have targeted me, you have committed a crime, and you are going to jail. But thank you. See you next time.